8,000 people came to watch. They came from villages across Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, farmers and labourers, and women carrying children on their hips, and old men who had walked for hours to be there. They came because they had heard that something was going to happen that day that they needed to see with their own eyes. The police had cordoned off the area. Government officials in suits stood nervously in the heat. Journalists had come from Delhi. International photographers with camera bags had come from further than that. In the centre of it all, a woman walked forward. She was 20 years old. She was 5 feet 2 inches tall. She wore a red bandana around her forehead and khaki military fatigues, and a rifle at her hip that she had used with a precision that had made the governments of 2 Indian states spend 2 years trying to find her and failing. She walked toward 2 portraits that had been placed on a platform. One was Mahatma Gandhi. The other was the goddess Durga, the warrior goddess of Hindu mythology, the destroyer of evil, the divine feminine force that the universe calls upon when the universe runs out of other options. She stopped in front of them. She pressed her hands together in the gesture of prayer. She laid her rifle at their feet. And in that moment, a 20-year-old woman with no education, no caste privilege, no political connections, no money, no family standing, no legal protection, no official record of anything except the crimes attributed to her. She did something that every government that had hunted her had been unable to do. She chose her own terms. Before we go back to the beginning, I need to tell you one thing. This story is going to be uncomfortable. Not because of the violence, though there is violence. Not because of the poverty, though the poverty is devastating. But because the story of Phoolan Devi forces you to sit with a question that has no clean answer. When a system fails a person completely, what does that person owe the system in return? We're going to hold that question for the next 30 minutes. We are not going to answer it for you, because Phoolan Devi never answered it either. She lived it. Phoolan Devi was born on August 10th, 1963, in the village of Gorha Ka Purwa in Uttar Pradesh, a state in northern India so large, so poor, and so complicated by the weight of its own history that it sometimes feels less like a place and more like a condition. Her family was Mallah, a subcaste of boatmen and fishermen who worked the rivers that divided the Great Plains of northern India. The Mallahs were not untouchables in the formal sense of the caste hierarchy, but they were close. Close enough that the distance between a Mallah child and the children of the upper castes, the Brahmins, the Thakurs, the Yadavs, was not measured in villages or income or education alone. It was measured in whether you were allowed to drink from the same well. The caste system of India is one of the oldest and most elaborate systems of social hierarchy ever devised by human beings. It has existed in various forms for over 3,000 years. By the time Phoolan Devi was born in 1963, 16 years after Indian independence, 15 years after the constitution that formally outlawed untouchability, it had been officially illegal for longer than she had been alive. It had not gone anywhere. In rural Uttar Pradesh in the 1960s, the caste system operated with the full force of a law that had never been written because it had never needed to be. Upper caste Thakur landlords owned the land. Lower caste families like the Mallahs worked it. The police were predominantly upper caste. The courts were predominantly upper caste. The government officials who administered the villages were predominantly upper caste. If you were born Mallah, if you were born female and Mallah, the architecture of the world you were born into had been designed, with centuries of accumulated deliberateness, to ensure that you stayed exactly where you were. Phoolan Devi's father, Devidin, had a small plot of land, a modest inheritance from his own father, that was being disputed by his cousin Biharilal, who was connected to more powerful families in the village. The dispute was not complicated legally. Biharilal did not have a stronger claim. He had a stronger caste position. In a system where strength of claim and strength of caste were not equivalent, that distinction was everything. Phoolan watched this dispute from childhood. She watched her father lose. She watched the loss be accepted as inevitable by everyone around him, including him. She watched the lesson being taught to her, that the rules applied to her family differently than they applied to others, not because her family had done anything wrong, but because of the family they were.
She was not a quiet child.
From very early in her life, Phoolan Devi had a quality that everyone who knew her described in different words but meant the same thing. She pushed back. When upper caste boys threw stones at lower caste children, she threw stones back. When village elders told her to be quiet, she was not quiet. When her father's cousin Biharilal tried to steal the family land, she stood in the middle of the village and said things that a Mallah girl was not supposed to say to a Thakur man. She was not rewarded for this. She was not punished for it yet either. That would come. In 1974, when Phoolan Devi was 11 years old, her father made a decision that was, in the logic of the rural Indian caste system, entirely rational. He arranged her marriage. Not because he didn't love her, not because he was cruel, because in rural Uttar Pradesh in 1974, a lower caste family with a daughter who was already showing signs of being difficult had limited options. An arranged marriage was security. A husband was protection. A daughter who married well was a daughter who was somebody else's problem. The man her father chose was named Putilal. He was 30 years old. Phoolan Devi was 11. He took her to his village. Within days, she understood what had happened to her. She had been married to a man who owned a buffalo and wanted a servant who was also legally his property. What he did to her in those first days and weeks, she described in her autobiography with a precision and a restraint that is its own form of courage. She was 11 years old. Within a year, she had fled back to her parents. In the logic of the caste system, this was worse than anything her husband had done to her. A wife who returns to her father's house is a wife who has failed in her function. She brought shame, not on her husband, who had been 30 years old and married an 11-year-old, on her family. She was 11 years old, and she had already been failed by every institution that was supposed to protect her. The police would not help a Mallah girl. The courts would not help a Mallah girl. Her own community could not afford to take her side against the culture that governed them all. She went home. The village turned its back. And the girl who had always pushed back understood for the first time that she was completely alone. The Chambal Valley is one of the strangest landscapes in India. A network of deep ravines carved by the Chambal River through the flatlands of Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh, creating a geography of hiding places and escape routes that had sheltered bandits, dacoits, and outlaws for centuries. The dacoits of the Chambal Valley, the Bagis, the rebels as they preferred to call themselves, were not romanticised in the villages the way Robin Hood figures are romanticised in legend. They were feared. They robbed. They killed. They were outside the law entirely. But they were also, and this is the part that the legend always misses, outside the caste system. In the ravines of the Chambal, a Mallah and a Thakur held their rifles with the same hands. The hierarchy that governed every interaction in the village dissolved in the geography of survival. What mattered in the ravines was not your caste. It was whether you could shoot and whether you could be trusted. For a young woman who had spent her entire life being told that her caste made her worth less, this was not nothing. Phoolan Devi's entry into the dacoit world was not voluntary. In 1979, she was taken by a gang. forcibly against her will, by a dacoit named Babu Gujjar, who wanted a woman and had the guns to take one. This is the version of events she consistently told. It is the version documented in her autobiography. It is disputed by some accounts. The truth of exactly how she joined the gang matters less than what happened to her once she was there, and what she did about it. Babu Gujjar was brutal. He treated her as property rather than a person. The other gang members watched and did nothing. Except one. His name was Vikram Mallah. He was Mallah, her own subcaste. He was young. He was, by all accounts, genuinely capable of something that the men in Phoolan Devi's life had rarely offered her: respect. Vikram Mallah killed Babu Gujjar. He stepped between Phoolan and the man brutalizing her, and he ended the situation in the most direct way available. Then he trained her. He taught her to shoot. He taught her the geography of the ravines. He taught her the politics of the dacoit world, which gangs could be trusted, which territories were neutral, which police stations could be approached, and which would shoot first. And in the process, something happened that Phoolan Devi herself described as the first time in her life she felt safe. She fell in love. For approximately a year, she and Vikram Mallah led their gang through the ravines of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, robbing upper caste landlords and distributing goods to lower caste villages, holding up trains and releasing lower caste passengers while demanding ransoms from the wealthy, building a reputation in the villages that was part terror and part something that functioned, for people who had nothing, like justice. She was not a saint. She participated in violence. She was complicit in crimes that had victims who did not deserve to be victims. She was also, for the first time in her life, someone who could not be touched without consequences. Then August 1980 came, and Vikram Mallah was killed. Here is the part of Phoolan Devi's story that the legend sanitizes, because what came after Vikram Mallah's death is not a story of a woman taking revenge on the men who wronged her. It is a story of a woman being destroyed, systematically, deliberately, by men who understood that destroying her completely was the only way to put her back in the place she had dared to leave. Vikram Mallah was murdered by two brothers, Shri Ram and Lala Ram, Thakur men from Behmai village who had rejoined the gang after a prison term and who had never accepted being led by a mullah. His murder was a caste killing dressed as gang politics. After he died, they took Phoolan. What happened to her in Behmai village over the following weeks is documented in her own testimony, corroborated by other witnesses, and constitutes one of the most brutal episodes in the recorded history of caste violence against lower caste women in India. She was gang raped, repeatedly, by Shri Ram, Lala Ram, and by men from the village who were offered access to her as a lower caste woman who had forgotten her place. She was forced to walk through the village naked, a specific humiliation designed to perform, publicly, the reassertion of caste hierarchy. A mullah woman who had carried a rifle and called herself a dacoit was being shown, before the whole village, that the caste system's opinion of her value had not changed. 23 days later, a dacoit named Man Singh rescued her. She was barely alive. What she did next took 2 years. In the 2 years following her rescue from Behmai, Phoolan Devi did something that requires understanding on its own terms before being judged. She rebuilt. She formed a new gang, this time predominantly mullah, lower caste men who had their own grievances against the Thakur dominance of the region, and who recognized in her something that the system had tried to beat out of her and failed. She was not their mascot. She was their commander. She led raids on upper caste villages, targeting the wealthy, targeting the landlords, targeting the people whose caste position had always protected them from consequences. She distributed goods to lower caste villages. She was not consistent in this. She was also sometimes brutal, sometimes wrong, sometimes a criminal by any measure that mattered. She spent 2 years looking for Shriram and Lalaram. On February 14th, 1981, Valentine's Day, which is not an irony that history planned, but history noted, she found Behmai. Shriram and Lalaram were not there. She asked the village where they were. The village said it did not know. What happened next is the most contested and the most documented moment of her life. Her gang rounded up the men of Behmai, 22 of them by most accounts, 17 of them upper caste Thakurs, marched them to the banks of the Yamuna River and shot them. 20 men died. 2 survived. Shriram and Lalaram were not among the dead. They had escaped. The Behmai massacre became national news overnight. The government of Uttar Pradesh fell, partly because of the political fallout from the killing, partly because of the embarrassment of a lower caste woman doing this to upper caste men and escaping. 2 chief ministers were forced from office. The central government in Delhi declared the hunt for Phoolan Devi a national priority. For 2 more years, she evaded every search party, every roadblock, every intelligence operation. She was hidden by lower caste villages who fed her and misled the police, and regarded her, in ways that made the government furious, as something between a legend and a protector. She had killed 20 men. She was also the woman who stood up to the system that had killed everything it could about her first. Both of those things were true simultaneously. Here is the question at the center of this story, the one I told you we were going to hold. Can you separate what the system did to Phoolan Devi from what Phoolan Devi did at Behmai? The answer every honest account of her life has to give is no. Not because the massacre was justified. 20 families in Behmai lost fathers and sons and brothers, and the grief of that loss was real, and the justice they deserved, which has still, 43 years later, barely arrived, was real. But because the Behmai massacre did not come from nowhere, it came from the bottom of a system that had spent 18 years telling Phoolan Devi that she had no recourse, that the law did not apply to her, that the courts would not help her, that the police would side with her rapists, that a lower caste woman who fought back was more scandalous than the upper caste men who had raped her. She had not been wrong about any of those things. The system created the conditions. Then it was shocked by the consequences. I never wanted to become a bandit, she said later. The world forced me. The surrender of Phoolan Devi in February 1983 was one of the most carefully negotiated political events in the history of Uttar Pradesh. She did not give herself up. She negotiated. From the ravines, still armed, still evading, she sent messages to the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh. Her terms were specific and non-negotiable. She would not be hanged. She would not be sentenced to more than 8 years. Her gang members would not be killed. She would surrender to the portraits of Gandhi and Durga, not to the police officers who had been trying to shoot her for 2 years. The government agreed. 8,000 people came to watch. She laid her rifle at the feet of the warrior goddess. She pressed her hands together in prayer. She surrendered. But she did it in her own language, on her own terms, as an act that the people watching understood differently than the government intended. In the villages of lower caste Uttar Pradesh, her surrender was read as a performance of dignity. She had made the government negotiate with a Mallah woman. She had made the government agree to her conditions. She had forced the same system that had allowed a Thakur man to rape an 11-year-old and a village to rape a 20-year-old without consequences, to acknowledge her as someone whose terms mattered. Then they put her in prison and kept her there for 11 years without a trial. The conditions of her imprisonment were the subject of a later parliamentary inquiry that found them inadequate and inhumane. She suffered from serious gynecological conditions, the physical legacy of the violence done to her, and received inadequate medical treatment. The charges against her accumulated but were never brought to trial. The legal system that had never protected her now used its slowness as another form of punishment. She spent 11 years waiting for a trial that never came. In 1994, after the political landscape of Uttar Pradesh shifted, after a lower caste chief minister named Mulayam Singh Yadav came to power and recognized that Phoolan Devi's continued imprisonment was itself a political statement, the charges against her were suspended. She was released. She had spent 11 years in prison, without a trial, for crimes that the state had decided eventually not to prosecute. The men who had raped her had never been prosecuted at all. In 1996, 2 years after her release, Phoolan Devi stood for election to the Lok Sabha, the lower house of India's parliament, as a candidate for the Samajwadi Party in Mirzapur, Uttar Pradesh. She had no formal education. She could barely read. She had spent 11 years in prison. She was facing 48 criminal charges that had been suspended but not dismissed. She won by a landslide majority of 37,000 votes. In Parliament, Phoolan Devi was not comfortable. She was not supposed to be. She had not come from the class of people who are comfortable in those corridors, who know which fork to use and which minister to flatter and which procedural rule to invoke. She wore her discomfort as she wore everything else, openly, without apology, as evidence rather than embarrassment. She spoke about caste discrimination. She spoke about violence against lower caste women, the specific, systematic, unprosecuted violence that had defined her own childhood and that continued in the villages of Uttar Pradesh every day she sat in the parliament that was supposed to be addressing it. She was not always consistent. She was not always effective. Power, which she had never had and had fought her whole life to reach, did things to her that it does to many people who reach it after being denied it. She was accused at times of the same excesses she had fought against, accused of protecting allies who did not deserve protection, accused of using her position for personal enrichment. She was a full human being, not a saint. The legend had always tried to make her a goddess, Durga, the destroyer of evil, and she was not that. She was a woman from a Mallah fishing village in Uttar Pradesh who had survived things that should not have happened to anyone, and who had done things that should not have happened either, and who was sitting in the Indian Parliament demanding that the system that had produced her account for itself. That was enough. That was more than enough. In 1998, she lost her seat. In 1999, she won it back, from Mirzapur, the same constituency, by a larger margin. The people of Mirzapur, predominantly lower caste, predominantly poor, predominantly the people the system had always treated as background characters in someone else's story, kept voting for her. Not because she was perfect, because she was theirs. She was the first person who looked like them, who had walked into those corridors and refused to disappear quietly. On July 25, 2001, Phoolan Devi was shot outside her official residence in New Delhi. She was 37 years old. 3 masked gunmen fired 9 bullets. She was hit 3 times in the body and twice in the head. She died before reaching the hospital. The man later convicted of ordering the killing, Sher Singh Rana, said publicly that he had done it to avenge the Behmai massacre. He was a Thakur. He said that the honor of his caste required that the killing of 20 Thakur men be answered. He had waited 20 years. He He was celebrated in certain upper caste communities after his conviction. After escaping from prison in 2004 and spending 2 years as a fugitive, he was rearrested, convicted, and has remained a figure of admiration in the communities whose honor he claimed to have defended. The caste system that had produced Phoolan Devi and the violence of her life also produced her death. The same logic that had allowed a Thakur man to rape an 11-year-old without consequences sent a masked man to shoot a member of parliament 26 years later. The wheel turned, the system held. And yet, here is what this story is actually about. It is not about a bandit. It is not about a massacre. It is not about a politician who was flawed and human and complicated in the ways that all people are flawed and human and complicated. It is about a system. The caste system of India is not a relic. It is not a historical curiosity that modernization and constitutional democracy have rendered obsolete. It is a living architecture that determines, in 2026, right now, today, what happens to you when you are born Dalit or Mallah, or any of the hundreds of lower caste designations that structure Indian society. It determines which well you can drink from, which job you can apply for, which person you can marry, whether the police officer at the station will believe you when you say you have been raped. Phoolan Devi's childhood was not exceptional. It was typical. What was exceptional was what she did about it. The caste system requires, for its operation, the silence and compliance of the people it oppresses. It requires lower caste women to accept what is done to them as the natural order of things. It requires the Phoolan Devis of the world to believe that the law does not apply to them, that justice is not available to them, that the men who rape them will face no consequences, that the land stolen from their fathers will not be returned. When Phoolan Devi picked up a rifle, she was not just defending herself. She was refusing to be silent. She was refusing to accept that the rules applied to her differently. She was demonstrating, in the most visceral and unambiguous way available to her, given that every other way had been taken from her, that she was a person, not property. The massacre at Behmai was the most violent expression of that refusal. It was also its most morally catastrophic one. 20 men died who were connected to the violence done to her, but some of whom may not have participated in it directly. That weight is real. The families who lost their men carry it still. But the system that produced the massacre has never been held accountable for producing it. That asymmetry, the trial that dragged on for 43 years for her, the impunity that has always been available to those who raped her, is itself a verdict on the system she was fighting. In March 2026, Outlook India published a special Women's Day feature revisiting Phoolan Devi's legacy. The headline, Revisiting the Legend of Phoolan, Who Wasn't a Devi. The piece traced how her memory continues to fracture along lines of caste. A daughter of the soil who defied upper caste domination to some, a criminal responsible for a massacre to others, a complex human being who cannot be understood through sanctification alone, to everyone willing to hold the full picture. Her story is still being argued, her legacy is still being claimed and contested. Her name is still being invoked in villages in Uttar Pradesh by lower caste communities who feel that everything she fought against is still present in the systems they navigate every day. Because it is. In 2024, a Dalit girl named Anjana Ahirwar, 23 years old, filed a sexual harassment case against upper caste men in her village. She was found dead shortly after. The circumstances were described as mysterious. The men she had accused were from a dominant caste. This is not an anomaly. It is a data point in a statistical reality that Dalit rights organizations document every year. The specific, systematic vulnerability of lower caste women to sexual violence. The specific, systematic failure of the police and courts to prosecute it. The specific, systematic use of violence to silence lower caste women who attempt to use the legal system. The conditions that produced Phoolan Devi have not been resolved. They have been modified. More formal legal protections exist, more political representation exists, more public awareness exists. But the fundamental architecture of caste, the hierarchy that determines whose body is protectable and whose is not, persists. The political legacy is measurable. The solidarity among lower caste Mallah and Nishad communities that Phoolan Devi helped create in the 1990s has become, by the 2020s, one of the crucial non-Yadav OBC voting blocs in Uttar Pradesh politics. Her name is still invoked in political speeches. Her constituency of Mirzapur still associates her memory with the possibility that lower caste people can exercise power. She created political consciousness in communities that had been told for generations that politics was not for them. In her home village of Gorha Ka Purwa, there is a marble statue of Phoolan Devi. It shows her in a sari with folded hands, a devotional posture, the image of respectability and submission. She never looked like that. She looked like a Mallah woman in khaki fatigues with a red bandana and a rifle and an expression that said, "I know exactly what you think of me. I am here anyway." That image, the real one, the one the caste system tried to destroy, is the one that still matters in 2026. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers, and they killed her for it. Every story on this podcast is about a crossing, a point in a life where turning back was no longer possible, where the person at the center of the story had to choose between safety and truth, between silence and witness, between the life that was offered and the life that was demanded. Phoolan Devi crossed every line that the system she was born into had drawn to contain her. The line that said, a Mallah girl accepts what is done to her. The line that said, a lower caste woman has no recourse. The line that said, the law is for people who own land. The line that said, Parliament is for people who went to school. She crossed every one of them. Not cleanly, not without cost, not without doing things that others paid for with their lives. The full human being crossed those lines. Not a goddess, not a symbol, not the sanitized legend that the marble statue in her village tried to make of her. A woman who was failed by every institution from the age of 11, who found the only door left open to her was the wrong door, who walked through it anyway, who paid for it for the rest of her short life, and who sat in the Indian Parliament demanding that the system account for what it had made of her. The system never fully answered. The demand outlasted her. Lines Across Asia exists because Asia is the most historically rich and the most historically underreported continent on Earth. Its forgotten stories, the ones that didn't make it into Western textbooks, that were suppressed by governments afraid of them, that simply never found a translator or a platform, contain some of the most extraordinary human experiences of the last 2 centuries. We tell one story at a time, one person, one crossing. Xu Hongqi, who walked the entire length of China on forged documents and became the only person ever to escape Mao's entire prison system. Pramudya Anantathur, who composed 4 masterworks of world literature inside his own head in a prison camp and watched them outlast the dictatorship that tried to erase them. Kim Bok-dong, who was taken at 14, enslaved across 5 countries for 8 years, came home to a culture that imprisoned her in silence for 50 more and broke both. And Phoolan Devi, who was married at 11, raped at 20, wanted for murder at 25, and elected to the Indian Parliament at 32. Who said, when asked how she felt about being called the Bandit Queen, "I never wanted to be a bandit. The world forced me." Who proved, by being in those corridors, that the world that forced her had not succeeded in defining her. Who died at 37, shot outside her own home, by a man who believed her continued existence was an insult to his caste, who is still being argued about in Indian villages in 2026, which is its own form of continuation. Real people, impossible odds, Asia's forgotten history. New episodes every week.